This is Jeremy Wentworth-Stanley. I'm the fellow who has a hyphen in my name. The hyphen is silent, but I am anything but that. This is Jeremy Wentworth-Stanley. I'm speaking as the owner, author, proprietor of Respectonomics, and I have with me my co-host, Sarah Benton. Good morning, Sarah.
Good morning.
Yeah. And in the series that we're in, which we call the Compass Point series, we call it the Compass Point because the compass is what directs us to where we're trying to get to and reminds us of when to get back on course. And this one today focuses on the fear of success. Last week, we talked about the fear of looking foolish, the fear of rejection, the fear of failure. Today, we're going to be talking about, as I say, the fear of success. Before I get into that, Sarah, I would like to reset my compass. And that is something we should all do. Every now and again, wherever you are, any navigator will say this, you literally take your compass, you look at the map, and you make sure you are where you are and where you want to get to. And when you see storms, you think in terms of resetting your compass or resetting your direction. That's where we are.
Agreed.
When we look around the world today, we are in the throes of extraordinary, probably historically so, extraordinary volatility, unreliability, and quite frankly, a great deal of anger. You and I were sharing a few moments ago about the demonstrations that are going on in Europe. I believe there was one in Philadelphia yesterday. But regardless of that, I'm talking about this inherent level of anger that is out in the world today. You and I are familiar with a story of a mutual friend of ours who was laid off last week as a result of the machinations of a hedge fund. A hedge fund, as you know, is the one that goes in there and basically wants to do nothing but extract full profits and full cash that it can. It's not particularly interested in long-term continuity. And quite honestly, it looks at people, employees, suppliers, and all the people involved, the stakeholders. He looks at them as being somewhere between robotic and disposable. It's a dangerous combination. So
Right.
With that in mind, and I think people might quickly say, oh, well, that's a hedge fund. I think we would look at a lot of corporations today and apply the same metric. I want to be very sure that we don't make that mistake of pointing fingers at anybody. I mean, I've mentioned about the hedge fund, but outside of that specific instance, I want to be very sure that what Respectonomics does is gives people navigational tools. If we're going to present people with a compass, it's important that we give them the map. It's important that we show them how the compass works, where it points, and how we get there. And a compass is a very interesting allegory, if you will, or analogy, because it has a point going one way, but it also has a point going the other way. That's the one you might say north and south. It's a reminder of where we've come from. I think we need to be intellectually, morally honest about where we've come from, where we're going to. And it would be a great shame if we end up going somewhere where our history says that's not where you belong.
Right. The other thing I love about the analogy of the compass and, like you say, having the 2 points is another thing I think about is options, right? You have choices in the direction that you're going, right?
Yeah. You remind me of Winston Churchill, who said, yes, you can smoke a cigar and have a glass of brandy, right? But Churchill did say, only the foolish do not change their minds when things around them are changing. But we're living in this changing world, and therefore the compass is a very appropriate mechanism for saying, are we on the right course? Because if we're not, we must reset. Right. What I want to talk about this morning is that we've got some foundational issues that are taking place in the world economy. And this isn't Chicken Little talk. This isn't sort of, can we be depressing? And I certainly do not wish this to be a negative vortex. A negative vortex is that horrible thing that happens. I don't know if you've had this experience, but you go out for a cup of coffee with your friends and you say, you'll never guess what happened to me this week, and you tell them something awful that happened. And the
Mhm.
person next to you says, huh, you think that's awful. Let me tell you what happened to me.
Mhm.
And before the end of it, we're in a negative viral spiral, whatever you'd call
Right.
it. It's
Yes. Yeah.
awful. So we're not going to get into that. But I
Agree.
do want to remind ourselves that the foundations economically today are extremely weak. I've, in fact, come out with a new expression. It's called economic AIDS. And as you know, AIDS stands for, let me get this right, acquired immune, say it for me, immune, and now I can't even say it properly. But what I'm getting at is AIDS was something that we dealt with in the 80s in particular. The
Mhm.
AIDS that we're dealing with today economically is the acquired immunology to deficits. We
Okay.
have got more deficits in the world today, and we know that at the governmental levels. Less obvious are the debts that are being incurred now that cannot be repaid. So we've got people who, on installment loans on their cars, there's a figure 6.4% are behind on uh, two payments. We know that credit card balances are at historically high levels that will never be able to be repaid under normal circumstances.
Right.
And it's in the news every day. And I'm not pointing again fingers at anybody, but have you noticed all the layoffs that are going on?
Mhm.
They're going on in all different places.
Yes.
Now, one of the things is under the heading of economics is there's actually a sense of nature working its way through here. You may wonder what I mean by that, but nature is cyclical in nature. It is. The sun goes up, the sun goes down, the moon
Mhm.
goes out, the moon, what do they call it, wanes. But
Yeah.
we're full of cycles, seasonal cycles, our human cycles. I mean, you think of all the things that are cyclical in our lives and in around us. Cyclicality is a very big part of our lives. And the economy is no different. So we are in all of the all of the images anyway that we are in the potentially in a cyclical downturn. And the problem with a cyclical downturn is the tools that we normally had available to us to then soften the blow and to bring us back up again, a lot of those tools have already been spent. I'll give you
Agreed.
a classic example. In the Keynesian economics says that what you do when things are not going well, you engage in deficit financing. We've been engaged in deficit financing when things were good.
Yes.
So we got it the wrong way around, and we can get into the whole issue of where governments have been wrapping us all in cotton wool. Personally, and this is a personal opinion, I think there's been a sort of emphasis on government will control everything, and you and I will just toe the party line. I may be a bit harsh, but I don't think it's as straightforward as just protecting people's lives. I think there's a sinister undertone to that. If you compare us with the 1920s, you're seeing labor strife, you're seeing climate issues. Do you remember the Dust Bowl of the 30s?
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
seeing one of the most extraordinary lines I heard recently was that governments will need to take money off the table. And you sort of quickly say, well, that makes sense, except that it was taking money off the table that precipitated and aggravated the depression because we, in fact, started taking money off the table because money was linked to the price of gold. So as the price of gold went down, we took money off the table.
Right. Right.
So we're making a lot of the same mistakes. And the only other comment I'd like to make about the comparison is in the 20s and 30s, you saw two opposing factions gaining ascendancy. One was communism and the other was fascism, however you care to define these, but
Mhm.
they were incompatible. Do you not have a feeling, a belief perhaps, in the world today that we are dealing with incompatible arrangements? That
Oh, I
one,
think that yes, incompatibility across the board for
yeah,
many different
yeah,
arenas, right?
right. So, with that in mind, with that sort of very fragile background, with the the foundations being as weak as they appear to be, corporations, and I'm going to speak very clearly this morning about corporations. You and I have said all along that the whole principle of respectonomics is across the board.
Yes.
It applies to communities, it applies to weddings, marriages, it applies to social gatherings, organizations. Whenever there's an organization of two or more people gathered together, the principle of respectonomics holds true.
Yes.
That is, the principle is, of course, to restore the dignity of the human being. The the thing that's happening, though, is in the corporate world, the business world, I don't know what the statistic is, Sarah, but I would say beyond 50% of our lives is entwined with corporate life. I think it's got a big chunk of us, whether we're employed, whether we depend on a company, or whatever the connection is. Corporations, business is a very, very big part of our lives. Wasn't it Roosevelt who said back in the 30s that he said, what was it? The business of America is business. And that was in then. But I think, in
Right.
fact, today, business makes up an incredible part of our lives. When you go to a cocktail party, your opening line is, "What do you do?
Exactly.
Who are you with?" So the reason I'm appealing here to corporations is that the influence that they can bring to bear on what could be a social, I will use the one word once, catastrophe. Corporations are in a place to bring people back together again, number one. And what I want to do is not again, repeat, 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 not pointing fingers, not
Yes.
getting into politicians are nasty, corporations are nasty. I'm not going down that path at all. The path I'm going down is if these issues that we're talking about are rearing their head, which I'm asking you whether you agree with that or not. I mean, do you agree with that these nasty issues are out there?
Oh,
The,
absolutely. Like you say,
the,
though, across the board, it's not
okay,
just, it's a blanket, I
right.
feel like.
Yeah. And I think what we want to do, and Respectonomics needs to do, is to give corporations the tools to be able to navigate, but not only navigate through these storms, but also to be successful. To say, out of the crisis, what benefits, what advantages,
Opportunities. What are the
opportunities.
opportunities?
Yeah. That old Chinese expression, the crisis is an opportunity. So, but we need to give people the tools to do it. And I want to emphasize that. And I want to put one more card on the table. I'm throwing down the gauntlet. Well, I am throwing down the gauntlet. We need corporations now to put what's the expression? Not quite put their money where their mouth is, but to come forward, to move away from the sort of the rather marshmallowy, we look after our employees, we look after our customers, and all these kinds of almost plagiaristic comments. We need corporations to come to Respectonomics and say, show us how to do it.
We'd like them to engage.
We absolutely do. And I'm going beyond, I mean, engagement is fine, but I'm actually asking them to commit themselves
Hmm.
to understanding that the reason we need to do this, the reason this whole issue of the dignity of the human being is so important, is in fact, it sounds like a moral crusade. It's in fact a commercial crusade. It's totally, in fact, at heart, I would say it's even capitalistic. And the reason is that if we pay attention, if we build up the other human being, what are we going to get out of that? We're going to have loyal employees. We're going to have employees who are going to come forward with new ideas, innovation. We're going to have employees who'll see their ways to increasing productivity, which is one of the biggest bugbears of the economy these days. Productivity is declining. So we've
Hmm.
got an opportunity here for people to come forward and be more productive. And on top of all of that, if we create this sense of awareness, the sense of dignity, and apply this to let's just say to our employees, we will almost by osmosis find ourselves applying the same approach, the same awareness, the same dignity to our shareholders, to our suppliers, to our customers. In other words, I don't think you can treat let's say your employees poorly without in fact axiomatically hurting your employees as well, your customers. In
Hmm.
other words, Monkey see, monkey does. If it's in one place, it will be in another. Peter Drucker said that. What you do in one place, you will do in another.
Right.
So I think this whole business of being aware of the other human being, restoring their dignity, giving them the respect they're entitled to, is something that makes huge commercial sense and makes all the more sense when a business today is going to need to be nimble. It's going to need to be able to look over the proverbial horizon, see the storms that are coming, be able to navigate accordingly. The living compass is going to be vital to the not just to the success of the company, quite frankly, to the durability of the company, whether
Hmm.
it will actually continue in business. Look at Hudson's Bay Company.
Right.
I mean, you look at these people that are falling by the wayside. And I think that respectonomics, by dignifying the human being, is one of the most powerful, potent vehicles available to all of us to bring the ship not only into the right direction, but also to bring the ship into balance. The ship can take on all kinds of loads. You've been up to cottages when you load your
Hmm.
boat up with groceries and all kinds of things, probably cases of beer, if I'm not mistaken. Hmm?
Not me.
Okay, well, cases of wine, vodka, or something awful. But but you load the boat up, and what is the critical point about loading the boat? The critical point is the boat needs to be in balance. You put too much on one side, it will flip.
Hmm.
If you put it all evenly, you can take extraordinary loads. We can carry the loads, but we have to have them in balance. And the balance I'm keep coming back to here is the dignity of the human being. That's
Agreed.
that is the speech for the morning.
Was excellent. So,
Thank you.
what I'd like to talk about now or direct us to is you mentioned fear of success.
Hmm. Yeah.
So, in relation to respectonomics, and when we're talking about organizations and sort of that ripple effect, behaving in one arena lends itself to behavior in others. So, let's focus on fear of success now.
Okay.
What do you feel like? I can think of some things that are common causes of fear of success. What do you have in mind in terms of?
Well, fear of success, and we've named the other three, but let's just go over this now. We've shift gears. I want everybody to agree that the stage is set. The conductor has his baton up in the air. The players are all ready to play, and now we're going to provide the score, the music, if you will. And here it is. You've got fear of failure, you've got fear of looking foolish, and you've got fear of rejection.
Mhm.
No human being likes to be rejected. No human being likes to look foolish, with one notable exception. But being vulnerable, of course, is one of the keys to bringing people on side. Well,
Absolutely.
the other one, of course, is the fear of failure. The fear of failure is it's a great shame that we experience fear of failure, because if you think of all the great innovations in life,
Hmm.
penicillin and all these kinds of things, a lot of penicillin's not a good example, but Edison's a better example. How many light bulbs did he work on before he found out that carbon tungsten was the answer? The numbers, I can't remember the numbers, they're huge. So
Right.
failure, of course, is a word that's totally misused. It's a stepping stone, that's all.
Hmm.
You know, I even heard
Opportunity.
it. I
I
even
love the
heard,
word opportunity for it.
yeah, and I even heard it said recently, after one of these very nasty aeroplane crashes, that when an aeroplane fails, it's a good thing, and you can hear your blood boiling and saying, "What did you say?" Well, the reason it is a good thing is because it makes the next plane safer.
Right.
So, with that, let's put those away and answer your question, which is, what is fear of success?
Hmm.
Fear of success is complex. It's extremely personal. It's not visible in the traditional sense.
Hmm.
Fear of failure is, I mean, I can say things like, I don't want to do that because I think I might screw up. And it
Hmm.
can be a legitimate comment, quite frankly. But fear of success is rooted in a lot of the ways in which we were brought up. This is not a DNA item. This isn't necessarily, I'll be very careful on this. Let's remind our listeners, this is not meant to be supplanting good psychotherapy or good, uh, what would you call it? Well, call it psychotherapy. The people who are doing that, they've got a tremendous amount of work ahead of them. They are specialists. They are technical. They know what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm talking about, you and I are, what I'm talking about is the experiences that have created within us behavioral fears. And if they've created these behavioral fears, then by definition, logically, we can undo those behavioral fears. So let's take a look at what is it that brings us to the point of fear of success. It's prominent with firstborns. Firstborns experience it because when that firstborn child comes along, and every parent, by the way, on the firstborn thinks that they are the only people on this planet that have been able to produce another child.
Mm.
And it's a wonderful event. Let's not trivialize it, but the sort of it's a mountain of ex- things that happen in somebody's life when your firstborn comes along. It's incredible. I've never asked you this before, but how did you feel when your firstborn came along?
It's obviously life altering,
Yeah,
right? It,
yeah,
it it elicits emotions that even right up until they're actually
yeah,
physically present, you
right,
still can't comprehend,
yeah, yeah,
right?
right.
Yeah.
The only thing I can compete with is when our older daughter was born, and our first child, in other words. I was sort of called in to come and have a look at our daughter, and I was appalled because she was the splitting image of me. All I could think of is, what have I wrought?
Aw,
Ah, but
and
anyway,
she's stunning.
and she's stunning. And I'd love you to say something about hello, hello, hello. No, seriously, the trouble. I say the trouble. What happens with that first child, to sort of draw a sort of contrast. First child moves its thumb, and you go, "Wow, look at that." And then the child grows up a little bit, and you're just constantly amazed and constantly over the top about it. And it's a source of wonder, and it's a miracle, and you keep talking
It's
about it.
constant
Yeah,
milestones,
it is
right?
one after the other. And that's what happens. So that child is almost born to be perfect by definition.
Mm.
The fourth child comes up to you at the age of 15 and says, Mum or Dad, I just got a scholarship fully paid to Harvard.
Okay.
And the parent says, oh, really? On the fourth one. What I'm getting, you can see that I'm making a very idiot, broad point. But the focus and the concentration on the first is different from the fourth. And we always say we'll never do it. But
Yeah. I think it does have to do as well with, I'm going to kind of tap into that. I think
yeah.
some of it has to do with a comfort level.
Mm-hmm.
Is you've gone through
Yeah.
it before, you've
Yeah.
kind of,
Yeah.
you saw what worked, what didn't work, or where
Mm-hmm.
we made mistakes
Right.
or where things did well and how
Yeah.
you can morph and adjust and
Right.
change. So I think that kind of comes in, there's a comfort level because
Absolutely.
you started to learn how to navigate the waters, so to
Right.
speak, right?
And that comfort level, you see, is part of this whole process, because when you are comfortable with other people, you start creating this sort of, hey, you can do it attitude. Hey, this is great. Go for it. Go for it. Whereas with that, when there's not that level of comfort, it's easier to be more critical, to be more demanding, more, on top of and all that stuff. So what you will find with that firstborn and in the context of fear of success, you will find they are often perfectionists.
Mm.
They will not complete a job until they are absolutely certain that it is perfect. They tend to be workaholics. They tend to be, and this is the frightening one, they tend to be volatile isn't the right word, but they do tend to race up the top of the mountain, and they get to the top of that mountain. And when they get there, they're the ones who say, I can't do that again.
Mm.
Done. And they're the ones that go zipping down the hill again. And when they get zipping down to the bottom of the hill, they look at you and me and they say, I told you so. I told you
See,
I
and
could.
I like that because in my mind there are a few factors when it comes into fear of success,
Mm-hmm.
and one of those is fear of failure after success,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
correlates to your example
Yeah.
there. I think of there's fear of loss of relationships,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Because you feel like you might alienate
Yeah.
people, friends or family. There's the imposter syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
So that feeling
What is,
like
Sarah, what is the imposter syndrome?
you don't really feel like you deserve success.
Can I
So you're
interrupt
afraid
you?
of being exposed
Can I
in that
interrupt you?
regard.
May I interrupt you? I want you to continue with
Absolutely.
that thought. One of the other characteristics of fear of success is a sense of guilt. And that
Mhm.
guilt is, I am not worthy. And
Right.
one of the classics of this is you'll find this is very masculine, by the way, but what you'll find is that the individual will be extremely successful.
Mhm.
His father was, let's say, making 25,000 a year, went to work every day with his lunch uh,
Mhm.
bucket and so on, all of that kind of stuff. There he is making millions of dollars. He doesn't feel comfortable with that
Right.
because I know my dad didn't have this chance.
Right.
So
Right.
it's again, we come back to this single issue. It's very complex
Mhm.
and very hidden. And
Agreed.
honestly, of all of them, it is the most difficult to deal with. And the reason it's difficult to deal with is if you tell me you've got, let's say you've got fear of looking foolish. Let's just take that. I put you on the stage and I say to you, Sarah, sing a song. And you say, no way. I'm not going to make a fool of myself. And then I put out a draft, a banker's draft for $1 million.
Darn right I'm singing.
Hmm. We all would. In fact, I would sing to get the
And
check
please
first.
laugh away. I'm
Yeah,
fine with
exactly.
that.
Go for it. Exactly. But what's actually happened in that instance is you've been bribed. You haven't
Mhm.
changed your behavior. Well, our
No.
behavior is modified by our emotions. We all know that.
Right.
The
Right.
catch, though, is, and sorry, I interrupted you from before, so we're going to come back to this. But the issue I'm dealing with here is that the fear of success is guilt, it's perfectionism, it's the one where you hear the person saying, I could have done that, but I chose not to.
Mhm.
And it's not a choice that was a serious choice because I could have been a doctor, but I decided to be a vet. That's a perfectly, you know, whatever you'd call that, reasonable alternative. But it's that sense of I could have, I could have, I could have.
Right.
And by the way, there's one group of people that represent all of us. And that, believe it or not, is the construction industry. And the reason the construction industry is a good reminder is the construction industry, and you've probably had this personally, how many jobs does a construction contractor, carpenter, electrician come and do for you, doesn't quite finish the job? Have you ever noticed that? And you're left,
No, not at all. That's why I'm laughing.
okay, so you knows of what I does speak, right?
I do.
Okay. One of the fascinating reasons behind that is because that individual does not want to go through the inspection, the final inspection.
Mm.
So we are very much like that. I don't want to go through the final inspection.
Mhm.
I feel guilty. I am a
Yes.
perfectionist. I know I'm very capable, but I don't quite know how to bring it all together.
Mhm.
That's why I won't do it. What it comes to is, and I think you'll agree, and I want your slant on all of this, and that is we are complex beings. We know that. Fear
Mhm.
of success is a total tie-in to those complexities, more so than the other ones. So,
Agreed. And it like, in addition to the ones that we've covered as well, there's fear of increased responsibility. So what the expectations are on us, there's pressure on us. It could potentially be a heavier workload.
mhm.
So fear of wanting to take that workload on. How will I navigate that? How will I manage it? And the other one that is a big one, which I think interplays with many different arenas of our life, is the fear of change. How will success change my life? How will achieving those goals mean stepping into unfamiliar territory because we may not be used to it? You're stepping out of comfort.
Right.
Right? So we know what's comfortable for us. So it's that fear of that unknown or what it will be like in order
Right.
in doing so.
Now let me take you down one more path of what you've just said.
Mhm.
You've expressed very frankly, very beautifully and concisely the whole dynamic of fear of success.
Right.
And you and I would look at each other and look at people who experience this and talk about ways to confront it and to
Mhm.
eliminate it,
Mhm.
which we're going to do. But I want to put one more thought this way.
Mhm.
One of the problems is that fear of success characteristics, profiles, are the ones that lead us to taking excessive steps. So, in other words, all of what you've said is true. I'm
Right.
frightened of this, that, and the other. And then you go, right, I am going to deal with this. And you go for gold and you smash your friends, you give up on your family, you devote yourself to your work, all of those kinds of things. And it becomes really quite a nasty way of conducting yourself. That
Mhm.
is also how corporations can behave.
Mm.
A corporation runs the identical risk of fear of success. This is not unique to the individual. I am
Absolutely.
pleading to the corporation to recognize the fear of success dynamics,
Mhm.
but I'm also asking, recognize them within the corporate culture. Because
Mhm.
the corporate culture, those things, you've probably had this, when there's a campaign on to sell something or do something, and everybody gets hyped up on it.
Yes.
And it's in front of you, it's on your screens, you go home and it's in your paycheck. There's a reminder that we're all working on this particular product. It's way over the top. And that way over the top destroys a lot of the other initiatives and the balance
Mhm.
in the organization. And when those campaigns come to an end and we all go, oh, thank
And
goodness.
you drop it completely and move on to the next.
Exactly.
No balance, right?
Hello, fear of success.
Right.
There it
Right.
is at the corporate level. So, in other words, this is very not invasive, but it's very ubiquitous. If it's happening in you, it's happening in me. If it's happening in both of us, it's going to happen in the corporation. So,
Right.
this fear of success needs to be addressed.
Well, if you think about it, the leadership that is navigating
Yeah.
a corporation, an organization, a company, a small business, whatever size that may be, they're experiencing, in all likelihood, fear of success. So as
Oh,
you
yeah.
say, that's gonna trickle down and
It's
come
all
across the
trickle
board.
down. Yeah.
So, um, there are signs or there's things that you can look for that because as you said, it's about an awareness of having a fear of success because many people don't go to an automatic, I have a fear of success. It's
No.
I have a fear of failure. I have a fear of being
Right.
rejected. And so it's not the most common go to think about fear of success, right? So it's important to understand or think about what some of the signs might be
Hmm.
that might indicate that you might have a fear of success. And you talked about one of them was procrastinating. Um, you've got self-sabotaging behaviors on progress. So missing deadlines, not finishing
Hmm.
projects,
Hmm.
hence, not wanting to finish to go through that
Yeah.
checklist. It could be about feeling about having anxiety around success instead of excitement.
Right.
So it's changing
But
the language.
let's focus on what you call your signage. What
Mhm.
are the classical signs of fear of success? And interestingly, when it comes down to the expression of the fears, they're remarkably similar, whether it's fear of rejection or fear of success.
Mm.
The problem is, and let's talk about them. There's procrastination is one of them, sleeping too much, sleeping too little,
Mhm.
irritability,
Mhm.
I can't say the word workaholism,
Yes.
um, alcohol itself can be, you, we've talked about this. One of
There's
the
a myriad of outlets that people
Yeah,
could go to. Yeah.
exactly. The snag with alcohol, by the way, and this ought to be said over and again, is alcohol is in fact a depressant.
Hmm.
So it's totally counterintuitive to exactly what you're trying to do.
Right, right, right.
People who are one of the classical signs, people who don't take breaks. I must keep this going. I have to keep it going. I can't possibly move away from my desk. I'm too
Right.
important. But we see these, and where it gets difficult is that, and particularly with fear of success, is that the symptoms are very similar to the ones that we see with fear of rejection, for example.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Hmm.
we engage in avoidance behavior, we
Right.
engage in evasive behavior, we engage in extravagant behavior.
Hmm.
All of these behaviors that are what you might call out of sync with, let's just say, common sense.
Right.
Seriously.
Like avoiding opportunities for growth,
Right. I'll give you an example.
specifically. Right.
I, for a while, for whatever reason, sat in my office calling people at 8 o'clock at night about their portfolios. And superficially, you'd say, well, that's all right, because that shows you, Jeremy, that you're right on the job and, you care about them and, they're at home and that
Hmm.
they're sort of can sit comfortably and listen and think and so on. Actually, the net consequence of all of that was very, very negative. People did
Hmm.
not want to be bothered at 8 o'clock at night for a start.
They're starting to wind down. They're trying to decompress.
Exactly. They're trying to do that. Here comes Jeremy trying to stimulate conversation and all that. And then the other thing was they saw in it inappropriate behavior.
Mm.
So when somebody says to us, why are you doing that? Whatever it might be, part of us does need to look up and wonder whether it's a representation of the way we're handling some particular fear.
Mm.
And I think it probably was in my case. It was a sort of, I must go on doing this.
Right.
So once understand that
Hmm.
success or fear of success is very subtle, complex,
Right.
very personal, and not something that you can carry around. As I said earlier, you're not going to go up to your CEO or your husband, wife, partner, whatever. You're not going to go up and say, I am frightened of being successful. They would, whack you with a baseball bat and say, excuse me,
Right.
I need you to be successful. Which, by the way, is another of these nasties, because every partner always says the other one should be successful.
Mm.
So we get into that game again. So
Right.
once we understand the fear of success and it's how internal it is, and how it's really only you and I in our own individual lives can resolve it.
I feel like it's an aha moment
Hmm. Yeah. And
when
it
you
can,
when you figure out
right.
that that is
Yeah.
actually
Right.
what your block
Yeah.
or your barricade or your challenge is.
The word you say, block, is very appropriate.
Hmm.
These fears, the actual effect is they block us, they impede us, we self-sabotage,
Hmm.
we in fact stop doing things, and
Right.
then we find out other things that we think are going to give us pleasure. It's a mug's game. So we
So how do we
okay,
overcome the
okay,
fear of success?
okay. Here's the toolbox. And the toolbox works on several levels. The first one is, and we've talked about this, the importance of aerobic exercise.
Mm. Okay.
Very seriously, raising your pulse rate. And I think you're meant to do it for, what is it, 40 minutes?
Okay.
Isn't that right? 40 minutes. I think that's the number. But
I'm
raise,
not sure what the exact time is. I
but,
think any exercise is good exercise.
well, yeah, but I think you also want to give it a little bit of definition.
Mm.
The idea that it's 40 minutes and somebody says, well, I
Sure.
think it's 30, fine.
Sure.
But what is important is we put some degree of definition into the area of my body needs to be given this aerobic stimulus,
Right.
needs to get the oxygen into the blood, and the blood needs to be able to flow more easily. And and I know, everybody knows, when you get into aerobic exercise, you actually start paying attention to the things as far as your body is concerned, things that you shouldn't be doing. You
Mm.
actually sort of go, eating 3 butter tarts at midnight is not a good idea. I know, I know, I know, I know, I know. I've never done that
No, me neither.
ever,
Oatmeal
ever.
cookie.
I hope I'm sounding sincere. But so getting into an aerobic program is important.
Mhm,
But that said, fear of success, we know that a fear of success individual wants to do it all the time. They are the workaholic syndrome.
mhm.
And one of the great approaches to this aerobic program is 4 out of 7 days in a week,
Okay.
not every day. As a matter of fact,
Right.
you know that doing exercise, running every day is not a good idea. And here's the reason: because your muscles reconstitute themselves during the period of rest.
Mhm,
So, presumably, if it's true for the body, it's true for the mind and it's true for the soul. That, in other words, if you allow yourself the time to reconstitute, that is how you will strengthen yourself for the battles that are coming along.
mhm,
Very straightforward. 4 out of 7 days. That's the first thing. The second thing is to understand the need for rest itself. We've talked about this many times, but the idea of going fallow, the idea of allowing yourself to be at rest is
mhm.
very important. And there's one technique which is absolutely beautiful. We think in terms of, reflecting time and so on, which is very powerful. But try this one. And that is, you have an iPhone, yes?
Mhm.
And you have lots of things that you take pickies of, yes?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, here's the point. You take the camera or the iPhone and you put it away. Now, most people say, that's so you can't get calls and all that, and, you're not going to be interrupted. Yeah, it's true. The bigger reason is this. You can do this in your kitchen. You can do this at the top of Mount Olympus. You can do this wherever you want, but you actually stand and take stock of what you're looking at,
Mm,
quite literally. Just
mhm.
become the camera yourself. Let
Right.
your brain become the figure, the picture is imprinted in your mind. And when you do that, let's say you're looking at a kitchen chair, you can be quite mundane about it. You don't have to go, as I say, you don't have to go to some famous gallery or something. You can do that. But it's
Right.
fascinating that you can look at a chair and look at the different angles. Look at the way the legs are at a different angle from the back. Look at the different slats, the different kinds of wood, the different kinds of materials, and start looking at that. And when you do that, also at the same time, embrace what is the lighting like? What sounds are there in the air at the moment? What kind of noises do you hear? What kind of smells can you detect? You're in the middle of a hay field, you can say, I can smell this freshly cut hay, and look at the individual stalks of hay and look at the way that some are longer and shorter than the others. But that whole process of taking the picture of
Mhm.
nature, if you will, but it's not
Right.
just nature, it can be, a lamp, it could be anything. But it's a fascinating exercise and it's extremely restorative.
Mm.
And it takes, I don't know if you've know this, but when other than what you'd call professional pictures, you do a lot of those for, career reasons,
Or yeah, yeah.
of course. But uh, I don't know what the statistic is, but I've heard it's 90% or something. 90% of the pictures we take, we never look at again.
I would believe that.
Yeah. So with that in mind, why don't I say, well, if I'm not going to bother to look at them again, why don't I let me be the camera
Mhm.
and think what you're
Absolutely.
doing and you're taking full advantage of the entirety of the human being.
Mhm.
So you've got the aerobics and you've got the rest. They are the railway tracks. And you don't have to go around staring at a tram car every day to sort of think about what does that picture look like, but just make a point 4 out of 7 days.
Right.
The
Right.
reason, by the way, for that spacing, that 4 out of 7, the reason for that is when you can't do it on a particular day. I don't know if you
Mhm.
know this, but people, for example, who are giving up smoking, they say, right, I'll never have another cigarette. Well, sure enough, they do. What's the next thing they do? Right. I'm
Mhm.
really going to smoke now.
It's attainable goals, right? Setting attainable
Absolutely.
goals.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Attainable is a very good point. And
Yeah.
that's right
Yeah.
in your wheelhouse. So,
And I think, yeah, that's
right.
like taking smaller steps to get
Mhm.
yourself
Yeah.
progressively past
Yeah.
fears, right?
Yeah.
Manageable.
Right. The next thing to do is to start giving yourself rewards. Now, there are two kinds of rewards we can give ourselves. I did it this morning on a cup of coffee. I needed to go and turn on the maple sap boiler.
Hmm.
And the deal I made with myself was, Jeremy, go on, turn the boiler on, then you can have your cup of coffee. And it's not a big deal. But
Right.
actually it
But it's a
is.
small thing that's progressive.
It's progressive. It's a great discipline. It means that what I'm doing is I'm taking an activity and using it as a reward.
Hmm.
And the reward in this case was the cup of coffee. And
Right.
you know something, rewards are fascinating animals. I believe you're familiar with the football world. Of course, I know nothing about football, except they do wear these huge helmets.
They do.
Yes. And if you look carefully at some of those huge helmets, I don't know if it happens all the time now, but it certainly used to be the practice. When somebody did a really good pass or a good run or a good
Hmm.
whatever you do, what do you do? Kick. That's another big word, isn't it?
Hmm.
When you've done that, the coach would give you a little star to put on your helmet.
Hmm.
There is a 300-pound athlete with aerobics to beat the band, professionally making $1 zillion a year. All he wants is that little star
Hmm.
on his helmet,
On his helmet.
on his helmet. And that's what we are. We love those little rewards.
Hmm.
You think of the rewards that matter to you, the ones that you really hold on to. And it can be someone saying to you, My, that's a beautiful blouse you're wearing. It doesn't mean they took you to Paris.
Right.
It, the little rewards are very, very powerful, but we need to give them to ourselves. And one of the techniques that's extremely helpful is quite literally get a pile of paper clips. I'm not exaggerating. Get a pile of paper clips and put them on one side of your desk. Okay. Or
Hmm.
tokens, whatever you know,
Whatever you choose. Yeah.
whatever you. And every time you do something that is contributing to where you want to get to. So, for example, you're going to call a client or you're going to do a proposal or whatever it is. Well, I'm thinking of doing the proposal. Good. I'll give myself a paperclip. I start writing the proposal. Good. I'll give myself another paperclip. I've now written a paragraph. I'm giving myself another paperclip. At the beginning, you're very stingy. At the
Hmm.
end, you're giving yourself paper clips for practically blinking. And the point of the matter is, it's very Pavlovian because the more that we spontaneously and immediately give ourselves rewards, the more likely we are to repeat the activity.
Hmm.
And what we do is we take ourselves away from the pain, the fear.
Right.
In this case, we're talking of success. We remove ourselves from the fear of success to see, hey, how many paper clips can I move today?
Hmm.
And I mean,
So
it's not.
I was going to say along a similar line of thought in terms of that activity, but also thinking about redefining success.
Mhm.
So shift your mindset from seeing success as pressure to viewing it as an opportunity.
Okay, can I jump on that one,
You can
please?
have at
Yes.
it.
Okay, that is a very important point. Huge. One of the techniques that we can all use, we can encourage our children to do it across the board, is to write a journal. When you write a journal, it is absolutely true that it in fact moves you into being a guided missile.
Mm,
And that's not said irresponsibly. This isn't saying, okay, fear of success, we're going to really take you to the moon this time. No, what it does is this: writing a journal 4 out of 7 days. And what you do is three things. What did I do today? So I turned the maple sap on, yes?
right.
Had a cup of coffee. I put on this blue jacket. Whatever we did, that's fine. Just be very clear about what you did. Have you noticed, by the way, some of the greatest people that we can think of, the Roosevelts, the Trumans, the people that you admire. What's the one thing you know about them? They all wrote diaries.
Mm.
So,
Interesting.
yeah, there's a very significant point here. So, writing a journal, and you do three things. Number one, what did I do today? And Weight Watchers does this brilliantly. Weight Watchers says, what did you eat today?
Mm.
And they have a reason for doing that, because the more we record, the more we sell ourselves on ourselves.
Well, I think the more you're aware,
Exactly.
you may
Bingo.
not you may not be mindful of how much you're actually eating in a day or what you're eating in a
Exactly.
day until
Exactly.
you document it.
Until you start documenting it. Well, now we're going to document my day. So I
Right.
write down, what did I do today? And I boiled some sap, and I, took the dogs for a walk and played with my grandson and all these things. Fine. Then, and this is the really key one, what did I feel about what I did? And I'm going to give you an example of something. Supposing you've had a fantastic week at work, whatever it is, but let's say work. You've had a fantastic. And one of your colleagues calls you up and says, hey, this has been the week of weeks. Let's go out and celebrate.
Mm-hmm.
So you go out to the local pub and you celebrate like it's going out of style. Why not? Great reward, great fun, blah, 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 blah. And let's say you get sloshed. And I don't mean that unkindly, but it just, taking it to its point. But you do all that. You get home, and you get home late. And
Okay.
when you get home, you're exhausted. And also you said that you would pick up something on the way home and you forgot it. The point of the matter is, what in fact you did going out celebrating was pleasurable by definition. Why would you otherwise do it?
Mm-hmm.
When you write down, what did I feel about what I did?
Right.
You
Might
go,
be completely different.
it goes on. Yeah, exactly. It goes under the heading of, oops, I'm not really sure if that was a good idea.
Right.
So what's happening is, the things that are pleasurable, or we think are pleasurable, are often the things that create discomfort. And interestingly, the things that we don't want to do, that are, let's say, discomfortable, the things we don't want to do. So, for example, I'm going to call 3 of my customers who are really ticked off with me. So I call the 3 customers. Let's do the journal now. What
Right.
did you do today? I called these 3 customers. How did you feel about what you did? I feel terrific, because I faced them, I took them, I gave them great answers. And in fact, one of them is coming around to see me this evening.
Right.
All that kind of commentary. And the great advantage of this is, that was something I didn't want to do,
Right.
but my journal just said to me what great pleasure it gave me.
Right.
So
Right.
this is a very good way of, in within ourselves internally, of finding out what in fact gives us the genuine pleasure. And I said there were 3 things. There's the what did I do? What did I feel about what I did?
Mm-hmm.
What triggered the activity? Because if you can identify the trigger points, then on the points that were good, that gave you pleasure, then you'd want to be sure that those trigger points continue
Mm-hmm.
and are available to you again. If, on the other hand, like the example, let's go out and have a celebration, that was the trigger point that this person came in and said,
Right.
let's celebrate. You go, next time I'm going to say, no, I've got 3 phone calls I want to make.
Right.
So
Right.
it gives a discipline, but where you're looking at the trigger points. The one thing about journals is, they are extremely personal. They're confidential. They are not to be shared with anybody, because the
Right.
moment you share
Just
it
for
with
your own.
well, the trouble is, if you share it with, let's say, with me, you would start writing to see what would I think, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to what Sarah
Or
thinks.
you're opening yourself to,
Ah,
right?
and
Criticism, critiques,
yeah, I have shown
suggestion.
my journal to people. I don't want to be literal about it, because this is the key, though. This is really important. What you said earlier was about identifying your career objectives and so on. And the extraordinary thing about writing a journal is, it discloses to you truths about yourself that you had no idea.
Mm-hmm.
And you had no, and you go, wow, I never really thought about it that way.
Right.
It's a self-discovery, self-motivating. It's wonderful. I cannot if I was
Mm-hmm.
running a corporation today, every month, everybody would get a journal book. And by the way, it's written, not typed. It's not on the iPad.
Right. We
It's
talked about that.
handwritten. And by the way, the best time to do a journal is at the same time every day. So you say, I'll do my journal half an hour before supper.
Right. You're setting a pattern or a behavior
Yeah,
pattern or
yeah,
routine. Yeah.
right. Now, I'm going to let you know on to one other thing that's useful. We live in a world today, and I think you've hinted at this already. In fact, you just said, if I show my journal to somebody else, I'm probably going to open myself up to criticisms and suggestions and why would you do that? This kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing. One of the problems in I'm going to say today's world, have you noticed the level of criticism that's out there at the moment?
Mm-hmm.
That, jab, jab, jab. And frankly, this is a political statement. But when you look at politicians today, they live in a world of jabbing.
Mm.
So it creates a jabbing protocol.
Right.
People feel that they're entitled to jab, and people will jab you on things they have no right to jab you on whatsoever.
Right.
And it's debilitating, it's embarrassing, it causes angst. Let's be clear on that. And one of the best solutions to that whole world that says you should be whatever, whatever, every now and again, every maybe 2 months, 3 months, write down 25 things you like about you.
Mm.
And it's the most humbling exercise. You'd think it would be a sort of, you'd think the Jeremys of the world would leap to it and say, hey, ego, ego. It does nothing of the sort.
No.
It's an extraordinary opening up to yourself. And the fascinating thing is, as you write down those 25 reasons you like you, it's when you get to the 23rd and the 24th one that you really find where you really, really do like yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're
I
doing
think it'll be interesting to see how over time, how your list evolves.
I
So
know
what you discover about yourself that you may not have previously identified. So it would be interesting to
that is
compare
interesting. Yeah.
your list. Yeah.
Typically I haven't done that, but I think I will now.
Mm-hmm.
But as I say, writing down the 20, yes, I know, I got the message. But writing down the 25 things you like about you is a very powerful tool. And the reason it's powerful is because guess what? You're selling you on you.
Right.
It's always you on you. So if you think of
Right.
fear of success, you think of the aerobics, you think of the relaxation exercises, you think of taking pictures in your brain of your real self of things. You think in terms of explaining to yourself what you've been doing and how you've enjoyed doing them or not, giving
Mm-hmm.
yourself some opening there. And then finally, looking at yourself in terms of what a wonderful, wonderful person you are. See, we do this with our children, don't we? We start, and colleagues as well, actually, we start telling people what wonderful people they are. How many times have you said to your children, you are a wonderful person?
Mm-hmm.
Easily said, and nothing, and it's kind of nice. Though the truth is that individual has to say it to themselves.
Right. Right.
That's where the real power is. Now,
So
I'm
on
going
that,
to, sorry,
sorry, go ahead.
I only want to say one more thing. Once you're in this set of where you really start feeling good about yourself and you start crystallizing in this, we talked about fear of success. The techniques we've talked about are very, very powerful at eliminating fear of success because they bring balance to your life. They bring perspective.
Mm-hmm.
They reset your compass, frankly,
Right.
which is all we're asking ourselves to do. The only thing is, if you're going to feel good about yourself, which I think in this discussion we've agreed we do and can, then what you want to do is to have a contract with yourself of how are you going to apply this goodness that you have within yourself. And that means, in other words, I now, in writing, just like when you go to the bank and they make you sign all this stuff, you write to yourself and say, I commit to doing my runs every week. I commit to doing my 3 calls a day or whatever it is I should be doing. You said to me, for example, that I need to be doing a lot more work on my LinkedIn connection.
Mm.
That is where my contract should be. I contract Jeremy Wentworth-Stanley. I contract to complete my work on LinkedIn this week, or
Right.
whatever phases I need to be looking at. So writing a contract is a very good way of taking the substance of who you are and now putting it into executable form.
So, in summary,
Mm-hmm.
what is Respectonomics call out, if you will, or what would you like to say to organizations, businesses, corporations in regards to fear of success? What's your call out to? What's your
My
call
call
out?
out is this: to understand it, to embrace it, I mean, in the very literal sense of look at fear of success, the incredible damage it creates. That not only does it create damage in the sense that people are not operating at their potential, then by definition, the corporation's not operating at its potential.
Mm.
We live in a world where we need each other more than ever. We know that. The word collaboration is used kind of almost flippantly. But if I'm going to be successful, I have to be collaborating with my fellow employees, workers, counselors, and whoever I'm with. I have to be in that mode. The corporation has a responsibility to recognize these fears that people are operating in. And a corporation, here's I'm wagging my finger. You've seen in your corporate life, you've seen people who are, let's just say, paralyzed,
Hmm.
taking excessive medical breaks. They call them medical breaks, in other words, but doing things. And you've heard the proverbial supervisor reaming the individual out and saying, you are a lazy person and you should not, blah, 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 blah. You've heard all that, yes? The reaming out
Yes.
part. Yeah.
Maybe not quite. Yes.
I'm being very crude,
Yes.
intentionally. The problem with that is what in fact happens is all of that level of anxiety that we've talked about that inhibits our performance is actually accentuated.
Hmm.
In fact, it drives it deeper into the individual. So allowing room for these fears, allowing them to come out, allowing people to express them. We've talked about some of the personal ways of dealing with it. The way that I deal with it in the big scheme of things, as you know, I run the Dignity Trust, and the
Yes.
Dignity Trust is a group of us, you and Johan and several others. And these are people where we can talk very freely with each other. And you'll say things that maybe I don't want to hear, but the fact of the matter is, I know I'm safe hearing it from you. What
Right.
the dynamic underneath all of that is the small group.
Right. Well,
And
it's from a place of, it's all, everybody contributes from a place of
exactly.
support, a
Yeah.
place of growth,
Yeah.
right? A place of understanding,
Yeah. And not competitive.
compassion,
There's
empathy.
no
Yeah.
pride of ownership
No, no.
or authorship. So the key here is corporations not only need to recognize these traits in their individuals around them, but they also need to set up the opportunity for small groups. A small group doesn't mean all the people in the finance department or all the people in public relations. It means it might take somebody who's, the security guard.
Hmm.
You take the security guard and the CEO and someone who does coding in the evenings on the computers, whatever it is, but 5, 6 people come together, no agenda, and just start talking.
And so, how do companies, organizations, businesses get in touch with Respectonomics to discuss opportunities for tools and resources we can share with them?
I think it's seriously important that they do. I think we're beyond the days of talking. We're
So,
now,
how do they get in touch so
and
that we
the
can?
actual physicality is
Mhm.
there's Jeremy at respectonomics.com.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm on Facebook and
LinkedIn.
LinkedIn. And I think there's a number in it, Spotify. I forget all the platforms I'm on. But
Right.
Jeremy at respectonomics.com. If you look up Respectonomics, it will give you all the contact information. And
We
the thing that I do physically is we do these podcasts every week. That's part one of the thing. We want to hear from corporations who want to hear specific issues they want addressed. So they might come back with, product development, whatever it is they want to hear about. That needs to be made known to us. That's what they want to hear about. And the other thing is, you and I, we and I particularly, am out in doing the public speaking, holding workshops, holding consulting groups, talking to maybe 3 people, maybe talking to 3,000.
Right.
The principles are identical. That is now time for us to be aware of one another. And I want to make one last pitch, if I may, please.
Of course.
Yeah. In each of our lives, we deal with these fears. We know that. The corporation deals with it every moment of the day, wondering whether their product's going to sell that morning or not, or whether a loan's going to get repaid. The list goes on. So we all live with a great, great deal of fear. Our bodies reflect it. Our minds reflect it. We know that. But there's one place in each of the human being that is unique and is frankly the referee that's always on your side. And it's your soul.
Mm-hmm.
So when you find yourself out of order, for whatever reason, terrible things may have happened, always go back to your own soul, because it is your own soul that is the one that never is frightened. It is the one that is always going to be the umpire, the referee, the arbitrator, and is always the one that gives you the finest antenna of all of the best ways to go ahead. We talk about the soul of the corporation.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about the soul of the country. We talk about the soul of the individual. Let's put it back. Let's bring it back. Let's recognize it, and let's take full advantage. Full advantage. Let's give it its full due.
And on that note,
We rest our case.
thank you, Jeremy. Great discussion today.
Thank you so much, Sarah.